Who would have won in a fight between Georges St-Pierre and Anderson Silva if both of them had fought in their primes? I get asked this question a lot because I am only one of two fighters to have faced them both, and the other one being Nick Diaz. And listen, good luck getting an in-depth analysis out of Nick.
You know, they're selling you all wolf tickets, people. You're eating them right up.
I put this video off for quite some time because I have fought both of them, as you know. I have a win over Anderson and a loss to George. So I know no matter who I pick, there's going to be haters saying it was my own ego talking and not an honest breakdown. If I pick George to win, haters will say I'm only doing that to imply anyone who beats the great Bisping is awesome. And of course, if I pick Anderson to win, haters will claim that I am subtly suggesting that my loss to Georges St-Pierre was a fluke. But fuck the haters. I'm just going to call this as I see it because this is a fascinating topic which fans have debated for over a decade and will continue to do so for generations to come. The reason this fight looms so large in the imagination is that it could and should have happened. Georges St-Pierre and Anderson were exact contemporaries and in the division right next door to one another. Anderson won the UFC middleweight title on October 14th, 2006 and St-Pierre won the welterweight title 5 weeks later. Anderson's final fight as champion came on July 6, 2013, and George's final welterweight defense took place just 4 months later. In total, there were 2,682 days where these two amazing fighters were the top two talents in the sport, and the only thing separating them was 15 pounds. But for all the talk of this fight happening, it never did. So the fight has to take place in the octagon of our imagination. So let's get into it. Anderson Silva versus Georges St-Pierre. Who would win? First, let's crunch some numbers and see if we can get, a shake out of any cold hard stats. When listing stats about two of the most dominant UFC champs, it is necessary to condense it to the key facts. Otherwise, this video will take longer than it does for some fighters to finish a complete sentence. Here is the top line stats. Anderson Silva has an MMA record of 34 wins, 11 losses with 1 no contest, 23 stoppages due to strikes and 3 submissions. St-Pierre has an MMA record of 26-2, both losses later avenged, and he stopped 8 opponents with strikes and submitted 6 more. Very impressive. Anderson Silva defended the 185-pound belt 10 times, and some argue that should have been 11 because of Travis Lutter. Meanwhile, Georges St-Pierre retained his title 9 times. Anderson scored 18 knockdowns in the UFC, way more than any other UFC champ. But on the flip side, George landed 90 takedowns in the octagon, way more than any other fighter. Both champions were very hard to hit. Anderson had almost a sixth sense for avoiding shots, while the threat of George's takedowns was so great that even top strikers wouldn't commit to their punches, much less their kicks versus George. So, there is no real stat that you can print out on a piece of paper that shows that Anderson or George would have any significant edge over the other. So, now let's look at the quality of the opposition that each champion faced. Both men fought a who's who of their era and they cleaned out their respective divisions. That is a fact. Anderson's greatest wins were probably his 2 KO wins over UFC middleweight champion Rich Franklin, his second round tap out of Dan Henderson in the first ever UFC and Pride unification bout, and the breathtaking KO of Forrest Griffin, and the first ever front kick KO over Vitor Belfort. Anderson Silva also proved he could win a fight that he was losing, coming from a 4.5 round beating against Chael Sonnen in their epic first fight, and then he knocked Sonnen out after losing the first round of their 2012 rematch. George's most impressive wins for me were the hard-fought split decision over a very motivated BJ Penn, the much easier TKO in their rematch, plus the head kick KO of the legend Matt Hughes and the armbar victory in their rubber match. Then the effortless shout-outs of fighters like Thiago Alves, Nick Diaz, and wins over Carlos Condit and Johnny Hendricks. And yet, maybe I am missing one of George's big wins.
Are you intoxicated or something?
But whatever. But in terms of opposition, there's still much to choose between Anderson and Georges St-Pierre. We're going to have to go even deeper into the weeds, starting with whether Anderson or George's specific style of fighting would give either of them an edge, you know, when it came to the fight. Styles make fights. Anderson Silva versus Georges St-Pierre is usually spoken about as basically coming down to Anderson striking versus Georges St-Pierre's wrestling. And that is not a false reading. Anderson was primarily a striker. George spent over 2 hours, 22 minutes of his UFC career controlling opponents from the top position. But it is more complex than that. It always is. Anderson was a very underrated wrestler. Very few of the 25 men who faced him in the octagon, few of them wanted to have a kickboxing match with the Spider. Almost all of them went into that fight wanting to take it to the ground. And Anderson, for the most part, he did not let them do that. Yeah, he was taken down here and there, but for the most part, it was hard. Even world-class wrestlers like Henderson and Sonnen, they struggled to keep him down, and they struggled to keep him down, right? Both of them, in the end, though, they were submitted on the ground by the BJJ black belt. Likewise, let's not forget that George was a very good striker in his own right, with an arsenal of shots from Superman punches, hook kicks, Kyokushin-style karate, and a spear of a left jab. But I don't know if he could land enough of his best stuff against Anderson to win in a pure kickboxing contest. Now, despite both having successes, I found it very hard to land the same combination on Anderson Silva twice. George would land on Anderson, I think, and absolutely wouldn't be afraid to fight Silva on the feet, but I think he would do so as part of a wider strategy, making good use of his takedowns and, of course, his ground game. To separate these two, and for me to get to where, you know, a point where I can pick, we're going to have to look at the intangibles. The aspects of MMA that are the differences between winning and losing, but can't be printed out or Googled. So, let's get a couple of things clear right now in our minds. The fight that I'm picturing taking place is George stepping up to middleweight to challenge Anderson Silva for the 185-pound title. Anderson did do a couple of interviews in 2010 about moving down to welterweight and challenging George, but by then he'd already had two big wins at light heavyweight, knocking out James Irvin and Forrest Griffin in the first round. Amazing performances. And after seeing Anderson look so strong at 205 pounds, well, Dana didn't really want to entertain the idea of Anderson having to literally kill himself to make 170, no matter how big the fight would be. So, the fight would have to take place at middleweight. George even expressed doubts about moving up while retaining his full competitiveness. But as we know, when George did go up to 185, he did just fine. I'm the only guy to ever fight the middleweight version of Georges St-Pierre, and I can tell you, he was very physically strong, he was fast, but maybe not quite as fast as what I thought he would have been given what we'd seen at welterweight. But I never once felt that physically he didn't have the strength for the larger division. He was able to take me down. Anderson was physically strong too. He was, you know, he has a lot of power in those long limbs of his, but take it from me, I don't think any of them would be overrun, you know, by the other one in terms of strength or striking power. One area though that I might give an edge to Anderson is fight psychology. As I said in the video where I break down my own fight with Anderson, the Spider is very underrated at mental warfare. Trash talkers like Nick Diaz, Dan Hardy, Josh Koscheck and BJ Penn, they all tried to goad Georges St-Pierre into fighting angry and taking more risks, but they all failed. Anderson is way more sneaky than that.
My opinion is the BJ Penn is the best.
Anderson, he lulls his opponents into a false sense of security. The bowing, the generous things that he says about his opponent's skills at press conferences, and even during the fight. He often smiles. He helps fighters to their feet at the end of the round. All of this is very patronizing, and it is a very clever way of mentally breaking down the other fighter. It's smart. Basically he's saying, I am more confident than you. He's saying it without saying the words. I have so much energy that I can help you to your feet, while you're so tired that you will accept help from your enemy. As I say, this is smart stuff, psychological warfare. After I won the first round against him, Anderson came up to me, gave me a huge, big, proud smile and then went in for a hug, as if to say, congratulations. That's what he was implying. You just won a round against the legendary Anderson Silva. You can go home happy now, right? But the thing is, because I watched him do this for so many years, I saw it for what it was. It was a trick, a mental trap. He was trying to protect his confidence and make me second guess how well I'd done in the first round. He was trying to say that winning a round against him was about as good as it was going to get. The man is a genius. Anderson has tricked so many very good fighters into having a nice, respectful, evenly paced martial arts contest right until the point where he lands the brutal attack which leaves people with their faces slashed open and their noses broken, wondering what the fuck just happened. Like a spider who stays still until the fly comes too deep into the web, Anderson Silva only pretends to be a respectful karate point fighter. When I was talking to the referee in our fight about my mouthpiece coming out, according to the letter of the law, Anderson, he had every right to land that flying knee. And listen, I might have done the same thing to Anderson, but there's some fighters out there that might see that as a bit of a cheap shot. But the reality is there are fighters that no matter what was happening, that was legal. You take advantage of it. So, you just go for it. But there's other people who wouldn't. Georges St-Pierre, I think he's one of those fighters that wouldn't. He's such a nice guy. George is the kind of guy who would try and turn himself over to the cops if he had an overdue library book.
For the best or for the worst? Be honest.
But still, Anderson's willingness to stretch the rules, take a couple of Thai sex pills, that might be the 0.5% that might give him the edge on fight night.
Are you crazy in your head, man?
Sticking with the mental aspects of the sport, both guys are incredibly mentally tough. Look, you don't get to be one of the top 3 or 4 people in any walk of life, much less fighting in a cage, without single-mindedness that very few people have on this planet, okay? You got to be something special. Anderson, I think he has the edge there too. Remember, he came back from 4.5 rounds. He was down against Chael Sonnen in their first fight, and then he knocked Chael out in the second round of their rematch in 2012 after losing the opening round of that fight. He also won the 5th and final round against me, and I'm not trying to big myself up, but I was known for taking over fights as the fight progressed with my cardio. But Anderson knew that he needed to win that final round big, and he was able to throw more strikes than I was in that final round so that he won that final round. Wasn't enough though, just throwing that out there.
Well, Bisping's just a dick.
But where George draws level though is when it comes to having a fight strategy. St-Pierre is one of the best MMA brains in the entire business. Anderson, he's like an artistic genius. Every fight is a blank canvas where he just starts doing his thing and sees what will develop. That is the impression that he gave me when I fought him. That's his plan. He just wants to show up and be Anderson Silva. And fuck, no one can say that it didn't work out for him because his career was just legendary. But when I fought George, he came with a detailed and specific blueprint on how to fight me. Michael Bisping, part of that fucker has admitted since, was that he knew that I was blind in my right eye, so he threw a lot of left hooks and they arched so wide that they were outside the field of my vision. Fair play. And against BJ Penn in their rematch, he used BJ's ability to stuff takedowns against him, obviously making BJ burn out his arms and his shoulders and get him tired. Now, Anderson didn't have any sight issues and wasn't known for fading as the fight went on, but trust me, George would have identified a weakness and come 100% ready to exploit it. Okay, right. So, after all this, I owe you a prediction. So, first, I'll say that if the fight took place at welterweight, like Anderson Silva himself suggested in 2010, I think George would have grappled his way to a comfortable 5-round decision. No submissions. I think Anderson at 170, probably weaker, a diminished version, and George would have had the strength and probably bossed him around the octagon. And also, if the fight took place in 15, 16 or 2017 at middleweight, I also lean towards George winning. He used his time away from the octagon to rehab a lot of his old injuries and of course to pack on a lot of extra mass and muscle so when he came up to middleweight. If he did that earlier, he wouldn't have the extra strength. But in their primes, from 2009 to 12, fighting at middleweight, I got to go with Anderson Silva. Now look, overall, I think it would have been an extremely close fight. George, no doubt, would have come in with a tremendous strategy. He would have implemented a lot of takedowns, and I think he would have a lot of control time. But as we know, at 185, Anderson Silva in his prime, the knockout power, the inventiveness, the creativity that the man possessed, it was absolutely mind-blowing. And I think that maybe somewhere around rounds 3, round 4, in a fight that Anderson Silva would have been losing, George would have come in for a takedown, he would have walked onto a knee, an elbow, a punch, a kick, something. And I do think that Anderson Silva would have been victorious. There it is. In their primes, I think Anderson might have got the job done. No disrespect to George. I am so proud to have shared the octagon with both of these people. Both absolute legends from the sport. Both gentlemen and both just two of the nicest guys that you could ever meet. Anyway, what do you think? Let me know in the comments.